Well, Kevin, welcome to our second live episode on Football in Focus. I know it's Labor Day, but thanks for joining me today. I know it's been a busy weekend for us both, and it's nice to be back in the comfort of our own homes.
It's good to be on with you, Ryan. Really appreciate it, and hope you had a great weekend. I know you had a fun trip with the family and flying all over the place as well, but it's good to catch up.
Yeah. I don't know if you joined us last week, but we had Kyle Bosworth on sort of talking about the importance of the preseason process, why we should care, why it's important, and why it's maybe a glimpse into the NFL stars of tomorrow. Well, with rosters sort of finally set in the NFL, I think we can finally get back to focusing on Sundays, and I know that's our sort of favorite time of the week. But before we get to that, Kevin, you had your first game with CBS Sports. I know you were at the Western Kentucky Bowling Green game. How was that?
It was phenomenal. It was a good first game to get under my belt there with CBS Sports Network Friday night from Bowling Green, Kentucky. Very fun game. Expected a lot of offense, and that's exactly what we got. Two new head coaches there, Dino Babers, former Eastern Illinois head coach, Baylor assistant, running that kind of up-tempo, what they call their Falcon Fast offense there. You see Bryce Petty running it at Baylor. Expected them to just kind of come out and be a little bit too much for Western Kentucky, but couldn't have been further from the truth. Bowling Green goes 3-and-out, and Western Kentucky and their quarterback, Brandon Dowdy, never looked back. And Jeff Brom name might sound familiar to a lot of people. Brian Brom, quarterback at Louisville. Jeff Brom was a record-setting quarterback at Louisville. It's a long-time family in college football, and I'll tell you what, he's done wonders with that quarterback, Brandon Dowdy. He really had a roller coaster 2013 season, but set every possible school record, it seemed like, on Friday night. Over 570 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, and threw for well over 80%. Really just a miraculous game plan, and you could tell they put a lot into it, and he went out and executed it. And they won the game, I believe, 58-31. Great broadcast with my new play-by-play partner, Ben Holden, and CBS really does its A-plus effort all the way around.
Well, let me ask you about that. You were with ESPN last year. What was the difference? Were there any noticeable differences between the two companies, production crew? Are you excited to be where you are?
Super excited, and I think with ESPN, learned a ton last year. Wasn't really on any of the real marquee packages, and that's just because they have so many games. I mean, if you look back through your dial for this past weekend, they probably had 30 to 40, maybe more games if you count some of the online platform stuff they do have. So they're just spread. They're spread pretty thin. And CBS, they only have 5 full-time crews, and to be on one of those crews, you get all the bells and whistles. You get, the full package of graphics and the full package of stat crews and the telestrator and all the full-time things that help make that CBS and CBS Sports Network broadcast special. What you see Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson have for the SEC #1 game, all those elements and production elements, we have those same things and qualities to our CBS Sports Network broadcast. I think that's one of the things that's kind of distinguishing our network right now, is just the top to bottom uniqueness to the broadcast and the sponsored elements. We have a lot of great sponsors, and try to bring their pictures through and their stories through just as right alongside the players and the great games that we have.
Nice. Where are you next week? You're doing, when Army has a home game, you're doing all the Army home games this year. Is that where you are this week?
That is where I am. That is where I am this week. The Army home opener. Don't know if anybody out there has been to an Army home game up at West Point, but it is a special experience that I recommend everybody getting a chance to do at some point in their lives. And I think I'll get a chance. It's been a long time, Ryan, since I've actually been to an Army home game. So to get a chance to go up and do that will be really special for me. They're going to be taking on Buffalo, a team that won 8 games a year ago. Coach Quinn there has really got that program turned around, but they're going to be experiencing life without Khalil Mack, the 5th pick in the draft to the Oakland Raiders, and trying to figure out a way to slow down that triple option offense that Jeff Monken, the new offensive coordinator head coach for Army. If people don't recognize that name, you might recognize what Georgia Southern was able to go into the swamp and do to Florida last year. They were kind of the first FCS team to go in and beat one of the quote-unquote big guys. And in my opinion, when any team goes into one of those SEC quote-unquote powers and shocks the world like they did, that was Jeff Monken's Georgia Southern team last year. I think that really put that school and put Coach Monken on the map. He's got some history with the military academies. He coached at Navy for some time there. He coached all over the map, learning special teams. He really thrives on that and this speed spread option that they're going to do. I cannot wait to get up to West Point. Should be a really fun week and one of many trips I'll make out there this year, but I'm looking forward to getting around that Army football program.
Now, one thing that's interesting, I don't think the common football fan has a true appreciation for what not only student athletes do, the time demands both in practice and in the classroom that your traditional NCAA football player has, but you add on the element of a service academy, and it creates an entirely new kind of product on the field. An entirely different kind of athlete chooses to spend their 4 or 5 years in college playing for a service academy. I've been fortunate enough to see Army play Air Force. I've seen the Army-Navy game live one time. It's a different product. We don't see a ton of those guys then making the leap to the NFL after their 2-year service commitment. It really is a product of their love of their country, the love of the game that they play, and using that to get a top-notch education. Is that something that's just palpable when you're on those campuses and talking to those guys?
Some of the most unique individuals in our society. I spent some time out there a couple weeks ago and got to go to practice and eat lunch in the big mess hall with the team and just kind of immerse myself in that program for a couple days. And you start to really learn about these guys on a personal level. They're just different than everybody else. I mean, I know there's been some great leaders around college football and the Tim Tebows of the world who captain their teams to championships, but these guys are different. And you look through the history of Army and some of the guys that have played football there and the leaders that have been leaders not only on the field but off there, over 100 CEOs in our country have come from the Army football team alone. You've got guys that fulfill their duties. You've got the lieutenants. You've got the generals. You've got the 4-star generals that very much will be tuning into our games to watch their former team play. But you've got guys that move on into politics and help shape our country. You've got guys that go into, like I said, be running Fortune 500 companies and really the leaders of our country, both present and in the future, have spent time at West Point. And you see why when you get to know some of these athletes and some of the coaches that really take an honor in molding these guys. And one of the unique things that they've done this year that I know myself and Ben Holden, my play-by-play guy, will be talking a lot about this week is they finally have changed the off seasons for these guys. In years past, I know your time kind of being around Air Force and going to some of these games in Air Force, Army, Navy, and all these. I know, Ryan, you know about the off seasons that these guys go through are not like what Nick Saban's team at Alabama is going through. They're part of officer training, and they go out and they do their what they call their field work, where they're literally 3 or 4 months at a time out with their platoons and their fellow cadets. They're out on the countryside running missions and all the tactical training that they do. And then in years past, they've had to report right to training camp the next day. And some guys 15, 20 pounds under their normal playing weight. And you and I both know you get to training camp, you're getting ready to lose another 10 to 15 pounds. Sure. What Coach Monken did was he fought very hard. And the athletic director and some of the leadership there on the council there at West Point decided that they're not going to do that anymore. Those guys were granted the permission to do that in May, early June. So by the time mid-June hit, the entire team was back on campus together for an off-season program. And when I was up there 2 weeks ago, these guys look like football players now. The linemen are 260 to 280 pounds. The running backs and the linebackers are all shredded. They've been working incredibly hard with their strength coach there. They look like a football team that's ready for a season. And I think Army fans and fans around the country, and especially Buffalo, come this Saturday are going to notice a different kind of team than you normally see at the start of a season. I think that's going to be huge for that program moving forward.
You've spent some time in Army. You're going to do all their home games this year. I think I've been blessed. I go to a ton of games, and more often than not, whether it's a pro game or a college game, there is a returning soldier of the game that the entire stands gives a standing ovation to. It's something that really started 3 or 4 years ago, and I think as a sporting nation, we're doing such a great job to honor and recognize our servicemen and women. And Army, that's it. That's sort of the top of the food chain. I mean, that is what they do. Give us an idea, in the guys that you've talked to, the guys that you've interviewed, what kind of an individual goes to a service academy to play? I mean, obviously, a lot of guys are going to play college football with aspirations of playing in the NFL. The guys at these service academies are different. What makes them different? What's that kind of a guy? Because I know when we tune in on Saturdays and watch Army or Navy or Air Force, whatever it may be, we're excited to see those guys. What makes that kind of a guy tick?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because I was just on the phone a little bit ago with a reporter that I've known for a long time, but he is specializing in the service academies right now. And we were talking about a kid by the name of Terry Baggett, and I even hesitate to call him a kid because getting a chance to know him, he's one of their 1,000-yard rushers from a year ago, really a leader on that team. Hearing about him growing up in Chicago and being an all-conference football and basketball player, there was just always something a little bit different about him from a standpoint of, he always wanted that next challenge. He always wanted to continue to challenge himself in ways that other guys really didn't. And his high school coach says it, the Army coaches both all say it, that he's just one of those guys that there's no obstacle he cannot overcome. There's no challenge that he views as unbeatable. And I think that's why a guy like that goes to West Point. He sees himself, obviously maybe it's something having to do with military backgrounds. You read a lot of these guys' bios, and you hear about grandparents that stormed the beaches of Normandy. You hear about, guys who lost great-grandparents in World War I, or they've recently lost a grandparent that served 30 years for the Army or in the Navy or the Air Force Academy or even the Coast Guard. You just hear about guys that have family traditions of wanting to be the next in line to fight for their country and defend the freedoms that we all sometimes take for granted. And I think it's important, and I know I've really taken a step back, Ryan, and really kind of found myself having even more of a respect for these guys than I already have, and that's with a father that worked for the government for 25 years and put his life on the line. There's no question that these guys are a little different, and there's no question they're different for a lot of the greatest reasons that make up our great country. And to be quite honest with you, at a time where I think sometimes people question some of the youth in our society, what makes them tick with the social media, the cell phones when they're 5 years old, and everything that goes along with video games and some of the negative things that's happened in our society with shootings at schools and things like that, I got to tell you, it was refreshing to get to know these guys, because it made me feel really good about where we're at as a country and where we're at moving forward, knowing that these guys will be the leadership defending our country.
I just think it's great, and I don't want to harp on it too much. I had 2 grandfathers that served in World War II, and it just takes a special individual to serve, and it takes a special individual to attend one of these service academies, and I'm really excited that you're doing their home games this year. I'm excited to tune in, and I hope that kind of the measure of those individuals really comes through in the broadcast, because it is something that's truly special, truly unique, and as football fans, I think we can get excited about those guys just like the guys that are playing on Alabama or Oregon or UCLA or SC or whatever it happens to be. I was fortunate enough to go to 3 games this week. I saw Wake Forest, Louisiana Monroe on Thursday night. I'd never been to Monroe, Louisiana, and they did a camo night. I certainly wasn't prepared for camo night because I don't own anything that's even remotely close to camo. Couple of kids, Pete Thomas, the Louisiana Monroe quarterback who was a Colorado State quarterback, transferred to NC State and then transferred to Louisiana Monroe. At the end of this year, he will have started 41 or 42 college games. He's a name to keep an eye on as far as the draft next year. He was outstanding, leading them to a victory over an ACC team in Wake Forest. Centarius Donald's a running back for Louisiana Monroe who's had 3 ACL injuries and looked like the most explosive player on the field. I don't know how that's possible with that number of injuries. If this kid hadn't had those ACL injuries, he's probably a top 3-round draft pick this spring. Friday night, I was at the UNLV-Arizona game, and I think Arizona's in really good hands with the quarterback that they have. Freshman, Anu Solomon, who they set a freshman passing record. Arizona set single-game yardage records, and I think they're going to be real special and a force to be reckoned with in the Pac-12. We talk about UCLA. We talk about Oregon. We talk about Stanford. SC had a great game that I was at against Fresno State where they were just dominant. The Pac-12 may be to the point where they're the best conference in college football. What do you think?
You know, I've been kind of on a national level doing some radio shows and even some of the CBS work. We had a segment on Friday night in the game where it was basically, they call it KO's top 6. And I talked about my 6 best football players in the country, in my opinion, right now. And I had to work really long and hard to narrow that down because in the Pac-12 alone, in my opinion, Ryan, the conference goes 7 or 8 deep with quality quarterbacks that all have a chance to play at the next level. I don't think you have that in the SEC right now. I think the SEC deserves all the credit they've gotten in the past. I think the SEC is the best football conference out there. But it might be 1A, 1B right now with the Pac-12, and I'll tell you why. The quarterback play in the Pac-12, if you created a Sweet 16, if you will, the 8 best from the SEC and the 8 best from the Pac-12, and games were played, forget at either home environment, because I think both conferences have great home environments. I think Hudson Stadium up in Oregon is right up there with anything the SEC has to offer. And I know that some people take offense to that down south where they think they've got the best venues in sports, and they do. But you got to really take advantage of being around the country like you and I have gotten the chance to do and seeing these venues. Apart from that, you set up a Sweet 16 and you create a playoff format just with these 2 conferences, and I'd be very surprised if those games don't come down to the wire, which a lot of people would expect them to do. And you and I both know the most important aspect of games coming down to the wire and maybe the last possession comes down to one position. And I think you agree with me, it's the quarterback position and the ability to will your team to win, both from a leadership standpoint, but from a physical skill set standpoint. And whether you're talking about Sean Mannion at Oregon State, who got off to a slow start against Portland State as a team, but Sean Mannion literally single-handedly led them to a win, which would have been a shocking loss if that happened. Brett Hundley, I know a lot of people didn't think he played all that well, but you know what he did on a 3rd and 12 with the ability to end the game. He stands in against an all-out blitz and fires an absolute strike. They get a 30-yard gain, and they win the game. Cody Kessler was tremendous for SC, and I think his name could get catapulted right up into the national landscape with a couple more performances like that. Obviously, Oregon, Marcus Mariota might be the best quarterback in the country. I think some people would argue Jameis Winston is that guy right now, but keep an eye on Marcus Mariota up at Oregon. Big-time game coming up this weekend. I know we'll talk about it in a sec here against Michigan State. That's a national game that everybody's going to be watching. And then the list goes on and on. You mentioned the Arizona quarterback. Taylor Kelly at Arizona State was phenomenal and playing only a half against Weber State. That's only a couple of them, Ryan. That's only half the conference, and I just mentioned 7 or 8 guys that I all think are game-changing type quarterbacks. I don't know if I can get past Bo Wallace at Ole Miss. I don't know if I could get past maybe Nick Marshall at Auburn, but he didn't even play because of some things that he did off the field. So That's about it for me as far as returning quarterbacks that are, I could say I'd make the bell cow of their team, and there's maybe 8 of them in the Pac-12. So SEC, you're up, quarterbacks. Try to figure out what's next.
And I think we talk so often, and it's apropos and it's appropriate that we talk offenses in the Pac-12, we talk defenses in the SEC. But UCLA's defense, I know it was against UVA, they scored 3 defensive touchdowns in the second quarter. 3 defensive touchdowns in 1 quarter. UCLA's defense beat UVA. And that's a Pac-12 defense that not a whole lot of people are giving credit to. It just shows, I think, the growth and the maturity of that program and the Pac-12 in general. Let me ask you this. We have a 4-team playoff this year. Are the 4 best teams, if they just went with the 4 best teams, are they 2 Pac-12 teams and 2 SEC teams? Or are we having to make room for one team in each conference to appease all the pundits out there?
Well, I've already kind of had this discussion at length with a lot of people because everybody thinks it's the SEC getting 2 teams in automatically for some reason, and the Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, and ACC kind of left to figure out the other 2 teams. There's a couple of really interesting things that goes into it. One, Florida State won the national championship a year ago with the Heisman Trophy winner that is back. I don't think that a one-loss Florida State team, as crazy as this sounds, will be able to find their way into the national championship. But I do expect Florida State to play pretty darn close to perfect football. I expect them to be in the playoff. I personally think that the SEC East, the Auburn, Alabama, Florida, the greatest quote-unquote conference and collection of teams in a lot of expert opinions there, I think they'll get a team in. But I think it's going to be the winner of the SEC championship game automatically finds their way in. I think the winner of the Pac-12 championship game, barring some kind of shock, I think it's going to be UCLA or Oregon coming out of the Pac-12, and I think it's going to be a team like Michigan State in the Big Ten. They're going out to Oregon. If they were somehow able to win that football game, I personally don't think that either team can lose their shot at the playoff, because I think college football, just take one look at what we saw last weekend. West Virginia had Alabama on the ropes with their up-tempo offense at one point in that football game. Oklahoma State played Florida State pretty strong for the most part and showed themselves well, having to replace pretty much their entire football team. Oregon looked great, but we're going to find out a lot about them again this weekend. And I think the SEC, as great as they are, their biggest issue is the fact that they don't have the quarterback play to really separate one team from another. So you're going to have a lot of 21-21 games in the fourth quarter, and you and I both know that crazy stuff can happen. Just go look at the Iron Bowl from a year ago. So I just think that those teams are going to end up with 1 or 2 losses, and I don't think a 2-loss SEC team should go to the playoff over maybe a 1-loss Michigan State team or even a 1-loss Oregon team or a UCLA team. And we haven't even mentioned SC. We haven't mentioned Stanford. We haven't mentioned some of these great foot teams that deserve to have their name right up there with an Auburn or a Georgia or some of those schools. So I think it'll all play out, but I got to tell you, I'm glad that I'm not part of that playoff committee because those people, without a standard number like the BCS formula, the one thing about it was a computer that decided. It wasn't human error and, hey, I like this team's uniforms over that team's uniforms. You better have a good theory and a good way to figure out who's playing in that playoff, or else we might as well still have the BCS because everyone's going to be upset.
Yeah, the irony is that we have been clamoring for a football playoff for these many years. We're going to get to a situation where the 5th team, the team that's first left out of that, like the 66th team in the NCAA basketball tournament, has a huge argument that they could run the table. The parity in college football, because of the recruiting process, because of the talent in so many areas of the country, it's razor thin as far as these margins. I'm going to the Oregon-Michigan State game this weekend. I'm really excited to see Connor Cook play. I'm really excited to see Marcus Mariota play. Oregon's defense isn't given the credit that I think they deserve, and I think that'll be a nice window into both of those teams' success later on. But we're going to have just as many people arguing that 5th team deserves a shot at the national championship as we did the 3rd team deserved a shot at the national championship last year without the playoffs. So I think it's going to be real interesting. It's going to make the regular season even that much more competitive in college football, and I think it's exciting for all of us to sort of be along for the ride.
No question, and you're going to be up there firsthand to see it. But the number one kind of argument against the Oregon program, as great as they've been in Chip Kelly era and the up-and-down exciting football, has been those smash-mouth games where they get their butts kicked by Stanford. And it's happened a couple times. USC with Matt Barkley went up there and physically beat the Oregon Ducks. And that's not a shot against any of their players because I know they've got a bunch of guys playing on Sundays they're tremendous athletes and tremendous football players. But if they have found the way, and if they haven't been focusing on it, shame on them, but if they have found a way to beat a power football team that wants to come in and give them a couple black eyes and really physically impose their will on them, if they found a way to do that and beat those teams, we're going to find out Saturday because that's exactly what Michigan State's going to try to go in and do to them. And if they're able to win that game, let's say they win it convincingly, Stanford, UCLA, look out, because I don't think Oregon loses another game if they're able to kind of handle Michigan State on Saturday.
No, I think it's a very good point. And Oregon probably has no fewer than 5 first or second round picks. They've got 2 first round picks on that defensive line. They've got a first round corner, and they've got an outside linebacker that will probably sneak into that second or third round. So they have all the talent in the world. But in talking to 2 of my clients, both Oregon guys, Michael Clay, who's a coach in Philadelphia, Taylor Hart, who was a 5th round pick defensive lineman at Oregon, now he's in Philadelphia. They've been worried about this game since the schedules came out. And I know they're worried about their program, they're worried about their guys, and they've both echoed the same sentiments that you just mentioned. The most difficult time they have is when they play the Wisconsins of the world, or the Michigan States, or the Ohio States, because they just don't play a Pac-12 style of football. They don't spread you out. They use 310-pound offensive linemen to assert their will. And Pac-12 schools are much more interested in playing fast, being fast on the field, and that almost necessitates you've got defensive linemen and linebackers that are slightly undersized. And so I think that in the trenches is where this game is going to be determined. It's going to be where it's going to be won or lost, and I think it's going to be fascinating for kind of the future of college football this year, because both of those teams could very easily give anybody in the country a run for their money in a national semifinal.
There's no question, and we'll have unique aspects next week talking about this. You obviously going to be on the ground there in the stadium, and that's a game I'm not going to miss. But I know we're also going to be very excited about the NFL opening this coming Sunday, this coming Thursday actually, with the Seahawks and the Packers. Is there a game or two? I know we're getting low on time here. Is there a game or two that you have your eyes on as far as maybe where one of your clients are, or possibly even a game that you just have circled as a fan?
You know, there are some interdivision games really early on this week. I mean, you've got, I think Cincinnati plays Baltimore this week, which is just remarkable that you've got division rivals that are playing that early. I think with Andy Dalton with his new contract, A.J. Green is healthy. They're missing Marvin Jones because he's out with an injury for the first 6 weeks. Ray Rice is out for 2 weeks. And they're, as much as Joe Flacco is credited with making that march a couple of years ago, that team is predicated on their run game and their defense. And I think that I think the game's in Baltimore. Even still, I think Cincinnati goes in there and probably wins that game. I mean, they are uber talented on offense and on defense. And I think without Ray Rice and with an aging defense, Baltimore is going to struggle a little bit. But I think as an interdivision game, that's a really interesting game to look at this week. Is there a game you're kind of got your eye on that you've earmarked?
Yeah, there's no question. There's one 8:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC on Sunday night. I love the Green Bay at Seattle matchup. I think that's great. But that Sunday night game, Andrew Luck going to Denver to play Peyton Manning. Andrew Luck's ready to make that next step. And in my opinion, he is a dynamic and a kind of MVP moment away from being maybe the best quarterback in the league. Aaron Rodgers better continue to play well. He better stay healthy, because number 12 in Indianapolis is on Peyton Manning and Drew Brees and Tom Brady's heels as far as being in the NFL. That game, Peyton Manning and that offense coming back after the shellacking they took in the Super Bowl. How will Indianapolis play them? They beat them a year ago in Indianapolis. Andrew Luck was phenomenal in that game. That game, obviously, I think will have huge playoff implications and could be a preview possibly of an AFC championship game down the line. I think for me, this weekend is more so about maybe some of the guys that aren't going to be playing. You mentioned Ray Rice. You've got the outside linebacker in San Francisco, Aldon Smith, not going to be playing. Josh Gordon in Cleveland not going to be playing. How many more guys are we going to see miss games and miss doing what they love to do because of either horrible mistakes with domestic violence or the inability to put down a drug here and there? Having been a guy that was shown the door out of the league, I take offense to a lot of the guys that are doing things that are jeopardizing their own careers, that they're almost treating it as it's a right of theirs instead of the great privilege that it is to be an NFL football player. So as a former player and any former players that are out there, I know we always take offense to guys that make very bad decisions off the field and jeopardize their own careers. But we'll see how that affects their teams, Ryan. I know it's going to be an exciting opening weekend in the NFL, week 2 in college football. Always a lot to discuss here with you and I here on Football in Focus, and I know I appreciate the time with you and look forward to hearing about your travels as well as sharing my own.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It always is. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about next Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern. Indianapolis probably wins that game in Denver if they feed my guy Griff Whalen. He is the secret to that offense's successes. And he's going to be their punt returner this week because they don't want to get T.Y. Hilton injured. So that'll be a game I'm focused on as well. So appreciate your time. I know it's Labor Day, but thank you, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.